$89,900 for a house on 3.65 acres. At first, this looks like exactly the kind of country property deal people say doesn't exist anymore. But then, the property starts asking questions. The highway is closer than the first photograph makes it feel. Inside, there are 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, window unit cooling, and finishes from another era. And that's when I started looking more carefully at the other cheap farmhouses. Because the more of these properties I checked, the clearer one thing became. The cheap price is usually telling you something. Sometimes it's the house, sometimes it's the land, sometimes it's the location, and sometimes the real cost only appears after you stop looking at the price and start imagining an ordinary Tuesday living there. So we're going through 8 properties, starting with the cheapest active-looking opportunity and working toward the one that gives us the best combination of price, land, condition, and actual practicality. And by the end, we're going to find out whether any of these are genuinely affordable or just expensive responsibilities wearing a low price tag. The reason I'm looking at these isn't simply because they get cheap. It's because acreage at these prices looks almost too good to be true. And if a property really is sitting there for a fraction of what you'd expect, I want to know what the price is asking you to accept. Number 8, 11,016, Highway 270, Whitehall, Arkansas. $89,900, 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, 1,424 square feet, and 3.65 acres. This one is much harder to dismiss, because we're looking at an active-looking property with enough information to actually evaluate the trade-off. The house sits among mature trees. There's open lawn, there's a paved approach, there's an older storage structure, and you've got enough land here to create some real privacy. But then the aerial view gives us another clue: highway frontage. That detail changes the character of the property. For someone who wants visibility, maybe even someone thinking about a business use, that could be useful. But if your dream is to disappear into the countryside, being next to a highway is a very different proposition. And then we get inside. Wood paneling, modest rooms, 1 bathroom, window unit cooling, a dated kitchen, a crawlspace foundation. This isn't a disaster. In fact, some of the practical details are pretty encouraging. The listing says the roof and siding were updated after a 2018 hailstorm. The deck was replaced roughly 6 or 7 years ago. There's public water, there's a septic tank, natural gas, a tankless water heater, and annual taxes of about $326. So now we're in a much more interesting position, because this property isn't simply saying, "I'm cheap because I'm bad." It's saying, "I'm cheap because I'm asking you to accept a different lifestyle." You get land, but you give up bedroom count. You give up bathroom count. You accept dated finishes. You accept highway exposure. And you're dealing with rural systems rather than simply plugging into every city utility. So the question isn't whether $89,900 sounds cheap. It does. The question is whether everything you're giving up is worth the land you're getting. And the next property pushes that question to an entirely different level. Number 7, 309 Eagles Nest Road, Emmelina, Kentucky, $149,000, 1,450 square feet, 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, and 52 acres. 52, that is the kind of number that makes you stop thinking about the house for a second, because suddenly the building almost feels secondary. You're not really buying a 2-bedroom farmhouse anymore, you're buying 52 acres with a house on it. And that's where the definition of practical starts changing. Because enormous acreage sounds incredible when you're looking at a number on a listing. But living with enormous acreage is a completely different thing. More land means more space, more privacy, more possibilities. But it also means more land to maintain, more distance, and potentially more dependence on the property itself rather than the conveniences you'd expect from a normal suburban house. And that's the recurring question I want to keep asking throughout this countdown. Are we looking at a cheap house, or are we looking at a cheap entry point into a lifestyle that demands much more from the owner? Because those are 2 very different bargains,
And that's what makes the properties higher on this list matter. The closer we get to number 1, the less interested I am in the headline price, and the more interested I become in what that price actually buys you. Number 6. 3068 Highway 169, Liberty, Kansas. 22 acres, a 228 square foot house, 3 bedrooms, 2.5 bathrooms, an old barn, a grain bin, mature timber, and the price? $180,000. At first glance, this might be one of the strongest land-to-house deals we've seen so far. But there's a reason I wouldn't buy this property based on the photographs alone. The house has a story of its own. An old schoolhouse was moved onto this property in 1978 and incorporated into the residence. That's actually pretty cool. It also explains why the house has such an unusual layout, with large rooms and transitions that don't feel like a conventional modern farmhouse. You've got a large eat-in kitchen, formal and informal living areas, a bonus room, baseboard heat, window unit air conditioning, rural water, and a lagoon sewer system. And from the outside, the property has exactly what you would want from this kind of purchase. Open land, trees, wildlife, creeks after wet weather, space for trails, hunting setups, or food plots. And according to the listing, the roof was replaced in 2020. But then you start looking closer. The flooring is older, the cabinetry is older, the fixtures are older. Several areas clearly need updating, and one bathroom appears partly stripped or unfinished. None of that is necessarily a deal breaker, because if you're buying 22 acres, maybe you're expecting to put some work into the house. But then there's one sentence in the listing that changes the entire conversation. The property has experienced some settling, and a repair quote is available in the listing supplements. That's not something we can diagnose from photographs, and I'm not going to pretend we can. But it is exactly the kind of thing a serious buyer has to investigate before falling in love with the acreage. Because now the question isn't, is 22 acres for $180,000 cheap? It obviously looks cheap. The question is, how much of that $180,000 am I really buying in land, and how much am I potentially buying in repairs? That's the difference between looking for a cheap farmhouse and actually buying one. This is a compelling property for the right buyer, but the right buyer is someone willing to investigate the settling, the relocated schoolhouse construction, the lagoon system, the older interior, and the modernization costs. Here, due diligence isn't something you do after deciding to buy. Due diligence is the decision. And the next property gives us a completely different problem. Instead of asking how much work the house needs, we start asking whether buyers simply don't want the lifestyle that comes with it.
Property number 5, 339 Station Road, Sherman, Maine. 4 bedrooms, 10 acres, 200 feet of frontage on Malunka Stream, and $194,900. On paper, this is incredibly easy to like. The house has a metal roof, a paved road location, a large open yard, trees surrounding the property, and inside there's an eat-in kitchen, formal dining room, double living room, first floor laundry, 1 full bathroom upstairs, and 1 half bathroom downstairs. For a family looking for space and land, this starts to look very reasonable. But then you stop looking at it like a vacation property and start looking at it like a place you have to live in every day. This is a 1950 rural house. The wood paneling is still there. All 4 bedrooms are upstairs. There's no recorded cooling. Heat comes from baseboard and hot water systems. Water is private. Sewage is septic. And there's a full unfinished basement. None of that is unusual for rural Maine, but that's exactly the point. The low price isn't necessarily hiding one catastrophic problem. It's the accumulation of smaller realities. Heating, water testing, septic maintenance, winter access, stairs, older construction, 10 acres that somebody has to maintain. And there's another clue. When this page was captured, the property had been on Zillow for 176 days. More than 1,500 people had viewed it. 155 had saved it. People were clearly interested. But interest isn't the same thing as a buyer, and that gap is fascinating. Because this is the kind of property that looks fantastic when you're scrolling through it at night. 10 acres, a stream, 4 bedrooms, under $200,000. But eventually somebody has to ask, do I actually want to live here? And that may be one of the biggest reasons rural properties remain affordable. not because nobody wants the land, but because the number of people willing to accept everything that comes with the land is much smaller. For the right household, this could be a great country property, but the price makes more sense once you include the climate, private systems, older construction, stairs, and maintenance. The land is real, the water frontage is real, the space is real, so are the responsibilities. And now we're getting close to the properties where the compromises become much harder to see from the first photograph.
Number 4, 415016. Blackberry Trail, Moyers, Oklahoma. This one is dangerous, not because it's obviously bad, because it looks really good. $179,900. 5 acres, 2 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, 1,468 square feet, a creek, a pond, mature trees, mountain scenery, and a covered front porch. If you showed me the first few photographs without the price, I'd probably assume this property costs more. The grounds are beautiful. There's open lawn, wooded areas, a pond or ornamental water feature. And inside, you've got a kitchen with an island and stainless appliances, a large primary bedroom, and generous living and great room areas. It even has a storm shelter and shed. And a section of Kimbrough Creek crosses the northeast corner. So where's the catch? It's not one big catch. It's a lifestyle. The water comes from a well. Sewage goes to a private septic system. Cooling is through wall or window units. The house has only 2 recorded bedrooms. It's 2 stories. And there's a space in the great room that the listing describes as a possible 3rd bedroom. That word matters. If you're buying this because you need 3 legal bedrooms, that's something you verify, not something you assume from a photograph. And that's becoming a pattern in this countdown. The photographs tell you what a property could feel like. The listing details tell you what you may actually have to deal with. Still, this is one of the more livable looking properties we've seen. The house isn't screaming for a complete renovation. The land is attractive. The setting is attractive. The price is substantially below what many buyers might expect from a 5-acre property with this much visual appeal. So why is it still affordable? Because you're not buying suburban convenience. You're buying independence. And independence comes with chores. Well, septic, limited cooling, a non-standard layout, 2 bedrooms, more land to maintain. For the right buyer, those aren't necessarily problems. They might actually be the reason to buy. This is where cheap starts becoming a more interesting word. It's not cheap because the property is obviously broken. It's affordable because the property is designed for a narrower type of buyer, someone who actually wants this lifestyle. And that brings us to number 3, where the house looks even more finished, but the paperwork gets more complicated. Number 3, 480 Honeywell Corners Road, Broad Albin, New York, $252,669. 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, 1,700 square feet, 6.5 wooded acres, and a stream. This is the kind of property that can make you stop thinking critically. The house sits well back from the road. The land is private. There's a broad living area, a wood-burning fireplace, an updated-looking kitchen, a covered porch, and an attached 4-car garage arrangement. It photographs well, maybe a little too well, because then the listing gives us 2 details that change how we should look at those photographs. First, this is a manufactured home with a built-on addition. Second, some of the photographs use virtual staging because the property is being emptied for an estate sale. Neither fact automatically makes the property bad, but both facts change the questions a buyer should ask. Does the addition have the appropriate records and permits? How is the manufactured portion titled? What does the foundation documentation say? Will financing work? Will insurance work? And does the property actually look like this when you walk through it? Those aren't exciting questions, but they're exactly the questions that separate a beautiful listing from a straightforward purchase. Then there are the systems. The house sits on a slab. It uses septic. There's a leased propane tank. There's a grinder pump, and no cooling system is recorded. Annual taxes are approximately $4,218. This is where the idea of a cheap farmhouse gets complicated, because nothing here necessarily screams disaster. The house could be perfectly suitable, the land could be excellent, the interior could look great in person, but there are enough unusual elements that the buyer pool becomes smaller. And when fewer buyers are comfortable with the property, the price can stay lower. This is a property where the photographs create the desire, but the paperwork has to earn the purchase. It offers privacy, space, and usable acreage. But the manufactured home classification, addition, estate sale condition, virtual staging, private systems, propane arrangement, and lack of recorded cooling all mean you shouldn't treat the $252,669 number as the entire cost of the decision. And now we reach number 2. It's the most expensive property we've seen so far. Which raises an obvious question. How can the most expensive house possibly be part of a video about affordable farmhouses? Number 2. 110 Bubba Road, Marion, South Carolina, $295,000. 3 bedrooms, 2.5 bathrooms, 1,862 square feet, 5 rolling acres. At first glance, this one doesn't even belong in the same video. It's almost $300,000. But look closer. It's a brick ranch. There's a 2-car carport, detached storage, a broad lawn, a rear deck. The listing advertises updated bathrooms and a newer roof. There's central heating and air, public water, septic, a fireplace, and no HOA or restrictions. Suddenly the property makes more sense. This isn't the cheapest house we've seen. It's one of the least compromised. The house appears functional and occupied, but again, the photographs don't show a brand new interior. The kitchen cabinetry is older. The wall paneling is older. Some flooring and finishes belong to an earlier era. And that's important because a buyer comparing this with a newer suburban house may immediately start mentally adding a renovation budget. But here's the interesting part. The property has been sitting there. The page records roughly 49 days on Zillow, with 1,174 views and 67 saves. So people are looking. People are saving it, but there's still a gap between interest and actually buying it. And that tells us something about the market. A property can be perfectly usable and still be affordable because the number of people who specifically want 5 acres in this location is smaller than the number of people who want a conventional house in a growing suburban area. The property is just off Highway 76 and less than a mile from a public boat landing. That's great if recreation matters to you, but the broader Marion market doesn't have the same buyer depth as a major metropolitan suburb. So the discount isn't necessarily hiding something terrible. It can simply be the price of being somewhere fewer people are competing to live. And that's a crucial distinction. This isn't the bargain because of the lowest price. It's interesting because it removes many of the harsher compromises we've seen. You still have dated finishes, you still have septic, you still have 5 acres to maintain. But the house itself is plausible as a home first and a project second. Which leaves us with number 1. And this is the property that on paper comes closest to answering the question we've been asking this entire video. What if the cheap farmhouse actually gives you almost everything you want? Number 1. 1601 Smith Street, Littlefield, Texas. 4 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, 2,792 square feet, 9.8 unrestricted acres, and $249,500. This is the first property in the countdown where I understand the appeal almost immediately. Not because the land is the biggest, not because the price is the lowest, but because the balance is unusually good. It's a broad 1962 brick ranch, metal roof, attached 2-car carport, fenced land, almost 10 unrestricted acres, and then you walk inside. The living spaces feel open and bright. There's a second living area. The updated kitchen showcases granite countertops, custom cabinetry, and a built-in spice rack, stainless appliances, double oven. Recent improvements include a new HVAC system and updated flooring. The house is move-in ready. A private office or study with built-ins in its own entrance. There's a storm cellar near the rear patio and room for livestock. And unlike several properties earlier in this countdown, you have city water and city sewer. That last part matters, because we've spent the entire video watching properties trade lower prices for wells, septic systems, lagoons, or older construction. This one removes several of those complications. So why isn't it $500,000? Because location matters. This is West Texas. The landscape is open rather than lush. The buyer pool is smaller. You're still responsible for almost 10 acres. Wind matters, fencing matters, insurance matters, maintenance matters. And there's one more thing in the listing that deserves attention. The house uses a pillar, post, or pier foundation. It still needs due diligence. And the market response is another clue. Roughly 149 views and only 8 saves over 87 days. It tells us something about demand. A property can offer a lot and still have a relatively small pool of people who actually want to live there. The low price is the market putting a value on everything: distance, maintenance, private utilities. Older construction. That's the lesson. Cheap isn't the same thing as affordable, and affordable isn't the same thing as easy. For me, the Texas Ranch at number 1 comes closest to the sweet spot. Almost 2,800 square feet, modernized interiors, and a price below $250,000. But even that property asks something from its buyer. You're choosing a quieter market. You're choosing responsibilities that don't disappear at closing. The land isn't free. You're simply paying for it in more ways than the price tag shows. If you were spending your own money, which would you choose? The 52 wooded acres in Kentucky? The Oklahoma property with the creek and pond? Or the renovated Texas ranch, which compromise makes you walk away?